If you're a busy age group athlete trying to juggle work, family, and other commitments to work towards a big endurance goal, then we've got a great episode for you today. We're going to do a deep dive into James's 9 hour and 17 minutes performance at IRONMAN Barcelona in 2025. Now, James is in the 45 to 49 age group. He's a doctor with a young family. He works shift work and works in multiple hospitals. So in this video, myself, Coach Kronk, I'm going to dive into why James came to me for coaching, how we work together, how he's trained towards breakthrough performances over the 2 years we've worked together. We're going to do a dive into his IRONMAN Barcelona performance and hopefully give you some fantastic takeaways. So let's set some expectations before we dive in. There are no hacks. There are no magic workouts. This is just a good coaching relationship that's based on honesty and openness, using my experience and his experience to collaborate, help James train consistently, and then going to races with a really solid plan that he can execute on the day. So James is already an experienced age group athlete. He's been following structured training and racing for years. But he came to me for coaching in May 2024 because he had a roll down slot to go to the Ironman World Championships in Kona. Now, you could say maybe he didn't want to have sort of imposter syndrome and he wanted to arrive on the big island feeling like he'd really earned his place. So he came to me for some coaching so we could really make the most of his training time and arrive at Kona in great shape. He wanted structure, he wanted to build his confidence, and he wanted clear direction, basically. He was highly motivated, very coachable person. He was already training very consistently, despite his very busy work and family life. He is very, very good at eking out time to train and doing quite a decent volume of training despite his heavy schedule. So a little bit about how this works. We use Training Peaks. So I deliver my athletes' plans on Training Peaks. With someone like James, whose weeks are never the same because of shift work, travel, family, etc., a couple of weeks in advance, James will leave a box for me on Training Peaks with his days laid out, telling me where his free time sits and what sort of training sessions work best on those days, and if he can possibly make it to club sessions on any of those days as well. So I hold off making any plan until James has uploaded those, and then slot the plan into place. Once I've uploaded the plan, I fire up a video just like this one. I will talk James through all of the training sessions within the plan, how to execute them, what to do, maybe if you're feeling good or not so good, why a session might be hard and what it should feel like, so that he goes into the week with full belief and trust in the training that he's doing. Now, I will say this wasn't super smooth when we first started. James loves to train, super active. So there was a fair bit of holding him back initially. And you can see straight away in one of the early weeks, like this session here, for example, this was a rest day. I'd left it blank. James had filled it with an extra ride at 0.82 IF. So not an easy ride. So we had to kind of just reestablish some rules and sort of say, yeah, there's a blank day in the plan. That is a rest day because I need you fresh for something that's coming up, or I really need you to absorb the work that you've just done. Every week, I'll look back at James's training, analyze all the data, read all of his comments, and then use that to update the next batch at 1 to 2 weeks of training plan. And then in the next video I do for him, I will talk back to him about the training that he's done, anything that I can see that's good or not so good, give him some more tips and tricks towards the next block of training, and away he goes. And then if there's questions in the meantime, we communicate on WhatsApp, quick messages or voice notes. So if he has a question, something's come up with work and a session can't be completed or needs to be adapted, can drop me a message, can jump onto Training Peaks and adjust so that he doesn't go wayward by trying to adjust it himself. And we can keep things nicely on track. And really with James, it's like trying to manage this global stress, which I think something that I've tried to get him to understand is he has a very, very busy life outside training. So sometimes you just can't cram in that training on top of that. And you've got to accept that, you are accumulating a certain amount of stress with this busy 12-hour shift. So don't add to that stress on that day with a hard training session. Take it as a rest day. Even if there is a little bit of time there somewhere for that training session, the stress of life on that day is so high, probably best to make it a rest day and come back stronger another day. So when James and I started working together, he'd already put quite a few events in the calendar. So initially, the problem that I had was trying to manage his expectations on how well he was going to recover between events and still be able to build fitness between them. His calendar was probably a little bit overloaded. So I think that raised some questions from James about, was he doing enough? Left to his own devices, he probably would have done more, but I felt that he needed more recovery between these events. But something I could immediately take control of was his race execution. Looking back at some other events, I felt like he was leaving something on the table with his bike leg in 70.3 distance events, and he had a couple of those coming up in the calendar. So immediately what I did was encourage James to bike harder and back himself to be able to still run well off the bike. So we were looking at about 5% harder because his previous bike legs were looking more like the low 80s. I felt like somebody with his fitness, his condition, could bike in the mid 80s as a percentage of FTP. So we used best bike split and we set James up with targets that he could have on stream to keep him focused during his bike legs. Our first 70.3 together was Challenge Wales, first middle distance triathlon. It went very well. He came third in his category. He followed the bike instructions extremely well. This is his bike leg file here. Typical Welsh course, very up and down. Even with that, he still managed to ride with pretty consistent power. You can see this variability index here, 1.05, which is really nice control over a course that was also windy on the day. And as you can see, has plenty of lumps in it as well. It's a very difficult run course as well, 3 times up quite a steep climb. So as you can see, he still managed to run a 1:36 half marathon on a tricky course. So we were really pleased. And I feel like that gave James some confidence in me as a coach, that perhaps I knew my stuff. And I think this kind of cemented our relationship a little bit going forward. The next middle distance race in 2024 was the Swansea 70.3. So again, encourage James to bike much harder, which he did. On a much flatter run course, he still managed to run a 1:33 off the bike. This time he was 10th in his age group, probably a much more competitive race, this one. So it was still a result that we were really pleased with. What is great to see is that we can compare this event to 2025, another year of working together. In 2025, again, good bike leg in the mid 80s as a percentage of FTP and variability index. Still good, nice control. It is a punchier course than the Challenge Wales course that we looked at a second ago. Then a 1:28. So much better run off the bike a year later. That's a significant improvement. In this race also, he switched bikes. The first time he did Swansea 70.3, he was on a road bike with clip-on aero bars. This time he was on his time trial bike. This time went from 10th place to first place in his age group. He won his age group. Fantastic result. Then the big goal of 2024 was the Ironman World Championships in Kona. James had a great race, 10 hours and 32 minutes, which I think is a really strong performance on the Big Island, especially for someone traveling from the UK, not used to those conditions. So yeah, we were really happy with that. Job done. So 2025, let's start looking into this year in a bit more depth. This is James's race calendar. We had a spring half marathon. First triathlon was an Olympic triathlon in Wales. A sportive for a bit of fun with some friends. The Swansea 70.3 again, which we just had a look at. 50-mile time trial. IRONMAN Barcelona, obviously, and then the New York Marathon to end the year. So this race calendar, I had a little bit more input in, and I feel like everything here was spaced out better so that we could get some meaningful blocks of training completed between these events. We did a little bit of testing here in springtime. Not something that we do too often, but springtime is a nice time to do some testing, see how training has progressed over the winter before perhaps doing a little bit more longer riding outside, etc. So a 20-minute FTP test here, which James scored at just under 300 watts, so about 285 watt FTP at this stage. I think James's weight mostly stays around 71, 72 kilos. So that was his FTP. A week or so later, he did the Newport Half Marathon, which he ran a 1:28. And in his 30-minute run test, which we had done prior, it was looking like his threshold pace was around 4 minutes per kilometer. And this half marathon was 4:10, which validates that nicely. With James's shift pattern and family life, there isn't really a typical training week, but I can give you an overshot of the types of sessions that we were doing at this stage of the year. So this is towards the end of April. He's got 11 weeks to go till the Swansea 70.3, but we're still 5 months away from IRONMAN Barcelona. This week that we've got here, James was able to make it to both of his club swim sessions, which is great. And you can see that the key bike sessions we've got in the week here, we've got some underovers and some sweet spot work. At this stage, if I'm going to put any VO2 work in the plan, it's probably going to be within one of the run sessions and not with one of the bike sessions. We'll see later on that there's some more VO2 work on the bike. And we're just starting to take advantage of being able to ride outside a bit more. Weather's getting better in the UK. In April, we're able to do 3 hours plus and actually run off the bike as well. If someone's riding outside through the winter in the UK, I don't tend to give them a brick run. I'll only give brick runs off turbo sessions because you go outside and do a long ride in the UK, you get wet, you get cold, then you have to come in, strip off all those layers, get your running kit on and go back out again. I just think it's a recipe for getting ill, so I don't tend to do that. But from April, when the weather's getting a bit better, we can look to do that. And generally, when I get within 16 weeks to go of a 70.3 or an Ironman, as long as the weather allows, I'll start looking to add a brick run off the long bike. This is a sort of a run that features a lot when we get into building phase, usually done on feel instead of trying to pin an athlete to a pace target, definitely not a heart rate target after a long session already. It's an exercise in pacing. So it's start easy, feel like you're holding back, lift to something around what feels like race pace. And then the final 5 minutes is hard above race effort. So that's a typical long session that you might see there. And then we can move on to the next week and have a look at other sort of sessions you might see. At this stage, the week before here, James actually made it to his club run session. So that's got his run intensity covered for that week. In this week, we've got another tough brick session off a hard underovers bike. So this is something that I like to do a lot, is give quite challenging brick runs. And then what we'll do is put a swim or a rest day between them. So this one, underovers followed by more threshold work on the run, but it's only 3-minute intervals. So not super heavy, but there is a solid dose of threshold work across that 2 hours. Then another brick run, which I do dish out quite a lot. Probably my two favorite brick runs with that build run that I just showed you is this one here, which will be 16 to 20 times 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Now, I've given James this one on this day because the week after he's actually got Mumble's Olympic try. So he's going to be running full gas pretty much for the run in that race. So it's one of his last really hard run sessions before that race. He's a little bit shorter on time over this weekend. I nearly always give my athletes 2 sessions. There'll be an indoor option and an outdoor option. So they've got their outdoor option if the weather's good and they've got the time. If they don't have the time or the weather's bad, then I give them an indoor option, which is a condensed session, which will usually have more structure within it than just straight zone 2. So this one, 4x20, good solid session. And that's followed up by more tempo work. With this run 6x10 at tempo the next day before going into a race week for that Olympic triathlon, which isn't really a big goal. And that's just a stepping stone towards the longer events coming up. What you'll see with my weeks is that they have this flow as well. Is we'll generally go hard, easy, hard, easy again, or rest. And then we go into longer sub-threshold endurance or tempo type stuff. So we come into the week after a rest day, we do our highest intensity sessions with a gap in between where it's just swimming or rest. And then we will do the longer tempo and endurance work then towards the end of the week. Something else that we would utilize once the weather improved in the summer was James's commute. We could often do sort of hour and a half to maybe 2 hours each way some days. And in that second ride, that ride home, I would put in some structure. So you'd have to hold back in the second half and then try and lift the effort to finish the ride and then also do a run off the bike. So we could actually get quite a good volume in that day split across those 2 rides and that run off the bike. Anyway, the Swansea 70.3, we've already had a look at that. We know that he won his age group. But what we can just see here is compared to the Newport half marathon earlier in the year, he's actually run a similar time off the bike in his 70.3. So we can clearly see things are heading in a good direction. Next, we had a 50-mile time trial. I encouraged James to do this. I think I actually encouraged him to do a 100-mile time trial, but didn't quite have the appetite for that. I really wanted him to see what he could do on the bike. You know, there's this theme that felt that he could bike harder and still run well off the bike. So I was encouraging him to do a time trial so he could really let rip without worrying about running off the bike and really see what he was capable of. So he did this 50-mile time trial in Wales and actually rode at a 0.89 IF and did 50 miles in under 1:58, which is a really solid time trial time. There's strong cyclists who would love to go under 2 hours for 50 miles. So to do that as a triathlete is fantastic. We can see now everything is where we want it to be. Now, we've got 10 weeks to go. So sessions are looking a little bit different. We've had a bit of recovery from the 70.3. Bike sessions are looking a little bit more like threshold and not so much under overs. And there's also some VO2 max stuff on its way as well. These long runs are going to keep getting longer and we're going to keep this tempo work within these runs. So generally, we're looking for these tempo intervals to be a little bit above the sort of pace that he's going to be running at off the bike in his Ironman, and the recoveries to just be a little bit below. So there's quite subtle changes there. And also these negative split runs we're looking at more and more as well to really develop that control of your pace, being able to hold back at the start of the run and then develop that stamina as well, being able to lift the pace and push through when you've already got some fatigue in the system. Great run to do the day after such a hard day before as well. Let's move on. Okay, you can see now VO2 max work on the bike as well, starting around sort of 5x5. This is a session I don't tend to dish out to people to do on the trainer unless I really feel that it's an athlete who can pull it off well on the trainer. It's a very hard session to do well on the trainer. Outside on a climb, you tend to find people can do this session better, get their heart rate up into zone 5 and keep it there. But a very tough session to dish out to somebody on the trainer. Now we're looking at, 9 weeks to go, and we're making these long rides, nice and long, 5 hours, encouraging him to actually go a little bit longer as well if he's got time. Generally, if somebody can ride longer than I've said they can for their endurance ride in the plan, I'm happy for them to do so, with the caveat that they need to look ahead at what's in the plan and ask themselves, can I honestly recover from this long ride and still bounce back to be able to complete the next hard session? But from early on in the summer, when people start riding outside more, if that opportunity comes to do that long ride, generally I'll say take it, because a lot of people don't get to do as much long rides as they'd like to. So when the opportunity comes, I'm happy for people to go for it. Treat every long ride as an opportunity to practice that fueling strategy, and make sure when there's a brick run off a long ride, you always fuel and pace that long ride so that you feel like you could run much, much further. At this stage in the plan, anybody can drag their body through a poorly executed 30-minute run off the bike. But I always want athletes to feel like 30 minutes is nothing, and they can execute it really well with good running form, and they could run much, much further if they had to. So not sort of getting complacent with fueling in the final hour of this ride, knowing that you've only got a 30-minute brick run. You're fueling it right to the end as if you had to run much further. And what that is also going to do, not only is that going to practice your fueling strategy for race day, it's going to massively help your recovery, which is super important at this stage, because you're striking a tricky balance between, can I do a really long, draining session, potentially too close together, and then still recover well to be able to do something that's very intense and hard, like a 5x5. So yeah, there's a tricky balance to be struck there at this stage. Also, it's worth noting as well that at this stage, I wouldn't be giving this sort of VO2 max session to every athlete. A less experienced athlete who's perhaps doing an Ironman for the first time would probably just continue with more of that sweet spot and threshold work, and keep them there where there's perhaps more specificity to what they might experience on the course, and more familiarity with that sustained power. But then more experienced athletes, we will do more of that, what we call icing on the cake work, where we'll sharpen up with more VO2 work in the later stages. Okay, so 4 weeks to go, final couple of big weeks. Here's a good one. So you can see threshold plus. So this is 4x6 minutes, just above threshold, really tough session. And then one of these brick runs, which has got hard 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. One of these sort of final icing on the cake, sharpening brick runs here off a really hard bike. So one of the hard brick days that I like to do, backed up then by long, steady days. So we got the long run done on this day, rest, but James had a chance to jump in open water for an easy swim, no problems there. And then a session which I do like to give out in its final stages as well is this with threshold ramp. So start at zone 2, increasing through to threshold for 10 to 15 minutes in the final block. Much, much harder than it looks on paper, that session. And again, backed up with some tempo running off the bike. Again, that sort of race effort tempo intervals. Then one of the last big long rides, 6 hours, 170k with his race setup. The weather was actually poor, which made it not quite the ride that James wanted it to be, but kudos, even after sheltering in a bus shelter, while some rain went through, he still got home and got out and did his run and executed it really well. So kudos for sticking with it there. 2 weeks to go then. We're starting to taper the volume down now, but we're keeping some intensity. So we've got commute riding, keeping it pretty easy. Club swim, classic 2x20 at threshold with a build brick run. 6x4 minutes at threshold run after, and then endurance. So we got back-to-back harder days, keeping with my method of going easy after the hard days, Then we've got a little bit of race specificity here. A much shorter ride, 3 hours, but 3 longer efforts within there, which are about 3 to 5% above race effort. Again, using race equipment, race fueling, using these as full dress rehearsals at this stage with another build run the bike. Followed up by, we've finished our longest runs now, so we're tapering down. So an hour and a half, this one, 3x20 at tempo. Then we go to race week, which is always going to be different depending on travel, etc. A couple more club swims, just easy zone 2 on the bike now, no more intervals apart from just a few openers in the afternoon once James gets to Barcelona. So a chance to put his bike together, take it out, give it a little test. 3x3 minutes, plenty of rest between each. So just little openers there. Then the day before, another little bike check, super easy ride, and a very short, easy run. It's worth noting as well that James would always, well in advance of the race, the beginning of race week or even a couple of weeks before, put in a race plan, and I would get a chance to look at this. We'd have already been discussing things that go in here beforehand, but he would put his version. I always encourage an athlete to put their version in first, and then I will revise it. So I encourage them to put some thought into it. So in James' race plan, he'd actually told me that he was looking at going sub 9. Now, I didn't think that was possible. I thought 9:45 was more realistic. So he very kindly met me in the middle with his 9:17. But what I thought was interesting about this was the confidence. It just really highlighted to me how far James had come since we started working together, from being somebody who was holding back on the bike, unsure of how they'd feel when they got off the bike and trying to protect their stronger run, perhaps being a much more cautious racer, to someone who really believed in themselves, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, so we knew it was a fast course. We knew training had gone well, and we were on for a really strong time. So we used best bike split. We had a little bit of a back and forth, trying to dial in a sensible bike target. We were looking at 72 to 74% of FTP. But what I like to use best bike split to show is that the time difference between, for example, between 70% of FTP and 76%, best bike split is suggesting you go going between a time of 4:55 or a time of 5:05. That's 10 minutes, okay, for 6%. Now, if you've ridden at 70% of FTP for a long time, you will know that 6% is quite significant and it feels very different for only 10 minutes difference in time. So what I like to help an athlete understand is that 10 minutes improvement in time worth it? What is the damage it could do to your run? And then we need to balance things up, because you could quite easily bike 10 minutes too hard and then run 20 or even 30 minutes too slow. So then it's not worth it, right? So we need to strike that balance where we say, can you bike 8 minutes faster and only run 3 minutes slower? And then you get that net gain. So before we dive into the race, just a quick look at where we got James to over 2025. You can see everything is building really consistently throughout the year. There's no major blips from time off or injury. It's all been building steadily. This week here, he was away in France with his bike, lots of riding. So there was a big spike here. We had a little bit of sort of recovery after that. And then it was the final build. And you can see this yellow line here, TSB, is like dropping and dropping further down in this final sort of big push in this sort of 6-8 weeks or so here. But then with the taper, come race day, we bring that TSB really nicely back into the positive, plus 33 there. And his CTL is huge. So showing that he's put a lot of work in, and hopefully mean that we've timed this taper nicely. So the swim went well. Good start to the day. We had a 1:02 and 30 seconds time for the swim. I've just got James's brief notes here. Choppy, he started in the sub 1:05 and he was going to go 1:10 but there was a lot of people there. So he basically pleased that he didn't, and he felt like he had a bit more space, and it was a wetsuit legal swim. So great start. Onto the bike, and you can see straight away 4:42, over 17 minutes quicker than what Best Bike Split had predicted. We know it's a super fast bike course, but also there's a little bit of drafting perhaps happening in these events, especially on a course like this, which is laps. So you get a lot of riders around you at one point. You can see intensity factor 0.72. And James actually said that he felt like he was easing off the gas at times just to maintain his position within a pace line. So he feels like he actually conserved some energy while still going at a very high pace, and yet, just under 38 kilometers an hour. So bike leg went very well. What I like to do is sort of split into sort of 3 or 4 sections so we can see how his pacing was. 0.75 Leon, so a little bit hard, but we discussed this and said in the moment, if you need to adjust to get into a pace line, which you can then settle into, it might be worth allowing yourself to go over target a little bit, and then hopefully things will settle down. So there was an allowance there to use your race experience at that point, and he's not gone hugely over target at all, and his variability index is still pretty low. Then next hour, we settle back down. So 0.73, a couple of percentage below, and we're still 38 kilometers an hour. So what we can see actually that with the little bit of a breeze is we're alternating between 38 and a bit kilometers per hour to 37 kilometers an hour. There's about a kilometer an hour difference depending on the wind. Again, variability index is nice and smooth, and we are under 0.74 intensity factor. Again, next hour, bang on target, low variability index again, and 37.7, so a little bit slower in that direction. Final hour, much lower power here, but you can see the speed is still very, very high. So he's allowed himself to back off a bit here, which could have been a very good decision at the time and helped save a bit of energy while still going at a high speed, knowing that he's on for a really fast bike time, saving himself some energy for the run. Really good use of experience there, not being too rigid with the plan, and setting himself up nicely for a great run. Okay, so James was 16th in his age group on swim, good solid start, 15th in his age group on the bike. I really like to see that a well-rounded athlete holds a similar position throughout swim, bike, and run. When you first start with an athlete and you look back at their past results, if you can see that they drop significantly from one discipline to another, then you can highlight that as a weakness and really work on that. So I like to see finishing in a similar position. And actually, what surprised me, he slipped down to 21st in his age group with his run, and his run was just under 3:24. So some really strong runners. That surprised me because in Ironman, you tend to see quite a large drop off in run performances when you go beyond the 40 age groups. So 45 to 49, you do start seeing run times get slower, and 3:24 is not a slow Ironman time. So super competitive race, obviously. We look at the pacing, same as what we did with the bike. We can just break this into sort of hour blocks and see. We got 4:44, 4:47. So yeah, pretty consistent, approaching 2 hours into the run there. Yeah, 4:57. So we're starting to drop off a little bit from 2 hours, 4:59. Nice to see though, it's dropped to 4:57 and it hasn't dropped much further. So he's managed to still hold just under 5 minutes per kilometer for the final hour and 20 minutes. And he did say that he had a couple of Waterloo stops in there, which he feels lost him 3 or even 4 minutes, which is quite a significant chunk of time as well. And then James's feedback actually says that it was only the final 10K where it really started to hurt. And I mean, the final 10K of an Ironman hurts for everybody. Nobody ever feels good at that point. So to get to that and feel like that's the only place where it's starting to hurt and the wheels haven't completely come off at all, you've dropped 15 seconds per kilometer over the course of the whole run. I think that's, brilliant execution, showing that his pacing's gone really well. His fueling has gone really well as well. So finishing time of 9:17 and 13th place overall in his category. Fantastic. And James actually said that looking back at past results, he thought that finishing top 50 in his category was going to be a good result. So to finish 13, we were both absolutely over the moon. I hope you enjoyed that deep dive into James's performance. I'm going to make more of these videos looking at breakthrough performances from athletes that I coach. I really want to show that my methods can be different with different people to get the best out of them. If you'd like to talk to me about coaching, I'll put my email in the description below. Reach out to me and we can have a chat. I also have training plans in my Training Peak store. I'll put a link to that down below. Also, in there, I have multiple Ironman plans, running plans, ultramarathon plans, and cycling plans. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and I will get back to you. Good luck with your training and racing. Take care.